Picture this of a snowy night, the kind where the wind bites your skin and the world feels frozen solid. An elderly woman, living alone in a quiet little house, hears faint whimpers outside her door. She opens it to find two shivering dogs, their fur matted with ice, eyes pleading for warmth. Without a second thought, takes them in, wraps them in blankets, and gives them a place by her fire. A simple act of kindness, right? But the next morning, she wakes to the sound of heavy knocking, and a police squad standing on her doorstep. Why were they there? What had she stumbled into? Stick with me. This story will pull at your heart, surprise you, and maybe even change how you see a stranger's kindness. Let's rewind to that night. Our main character is 73 years old, living in a small town nestled in the Midwest, where winters are brutal and neighbors keep to themselves. Her house is modest, heated blankets and old photos of a life well lived. Margaret's no stranger to loss. Her husband passed a decade ago, and her kids are grown, living states away. But she's got a spark, a quiet strength, that shows in the way she keeps her garden blooming even in the cold. That night, piled high outside, Margaret was sipping tea by her fireplace, the only sound the crackle of logs. Then came the whimpers, soft at first, almost lost in the wind. She thought it was her imagination, but when the sound grew desperate, she shuffled to the door, her slippers scuffing the wooden floor. She saw them, two dogs. One a scruffy mutt with matted brown fur, the other a lean hound with trembling legs. Their eyes locked on hers, wide and scared, shaking as snow clung to their coats. Margaret didn't hesitate. "Oh, you poor things," she whispered, ushering them inside. She didn't know their story, but she knew suffering when she saw it. She grabbed old towels, dried them off, and set up a makeshift bed by the fire. The dogs, curled up together, their shivering slowing as warmth sank in. Margaret smiled, her heart a little fuller. She named them Rusty and Scout, just for the night, and figured she'd call the local shelter in the morning. Simple enough, right? But the universe had other plans. The next morning, Margaret woke to a pounding on her door. It wasn't a gentle knock, it was urgent, official. She pulled her cardigan tight, her heart racing a bit as she peeked through the curtains. Outside stood 3 police cars, lights flashing silently in the dawn. Officers in heavy coats were gathered on her porch, their faces serious. Rusty and Scout, still nestled by the fire, lifted their heads, ears perked. Margaret's mind spun. Had she done something wrong? Was it a mistake? She opened the door, her voice steady but soft. "Can I help you, officers?" The lead officer, a tall man with a stern jaw, stepped forward. "Mom, I'm Officer Daniels. We're here about the dogs you took in last night." Margaret's stomach dropped. The dogs? How did they even know? She glanced back at Rusty and Scout, who were now sitting up, watching the scene unfold. "I found them freezing outside," she said, her voice firm despite her nerves. "I couldn't leave them out there." Officer Daniels nodded. His expression didn't soften. "We need to talk about where those dogs came from," he said, "and why they're so important." What Margaret didn't know was that those dogs weren't just strays. They were at the center of something much bigger, something that had the police, soon the whole town buzzing. But let's pause here for a second. Have you ever done something small, like helping a stranger or picking up litter, found out it meant more than you realized? That's where Margaret was, standing on the edge of a story she never expected to be part of. What was so special about these dogs, and why were the police so interested? Officer Daniels asked to step inside, and Margaret, though hesitant, let them in. The officers crowded into her small living room, their boots tracking snow on her rug. Rusty and Scout stayed close to the fire, wary but calm. Daniels explained, "The dogs belonged to a man named Thomas Reed, a reclusive widower, who lived on the edge of town." Thomas wasn't just any neighbor. He was a retired K-9 trainer who'd worked with police departments across the state. His dogs, Rusty and Scout, ordinary pets. They were highly trained, worth thousands of dollars, and known for their ability to track scents in the toughest conditions. 2 nights ago, Thomas had a heart attack at home. In the chaos, his front door was left ajar, and Rusty and Scout slipped out into the storm. The police had been searching for them, not just because they were valuable, but because Thomas, now in the hospital, was refusing treatment until he knew his dogs were safe. "Those dogs are his family," Daniels said, his voice softening. "When we got a call from a neighbor who saw you take them in, we had to come right away." Margaret's eyes widened. She looked at Rusty and Scout, who were now wagging their tails, oblivious to the drama. She'd had no idea. All she saw were 2 freezing animals in need of help. But the story doesn't end there. The police weren't just here to pick up the dogs. They had a request, one that would pull Margaret even deeper into this unexpected saga. Being the connection 700 Daniels sat down at Margaret's kitchen table, a mug of her instant coffee in his hand. "Mom, Thomas is stable. He's stubborn," he said. He won't let the doctors do what they need until he sees his dogs. We'd like you to bring them to the hospital. Margaret blinked, her hands fidgeting with her apron. Go to the hospital. She wasn't one for crowds or attention. Idea of walking into a busy hospital with 2 dogs felt overwhelming. But then she looked at Rusty and Scout, their eyes bright and trusting. Something shifted. All right, she said quietly, let's do it. The drive to the hospital was a blur. Picture this: Margaret in the backseat of a police cruiser, Rusty and Scout curled up beside her, the snowy town passing by in soft, white flashes. The officers were kind, about Thomas's legendary work with K9 units, how Rusty and Scout had once tracked a missing child through a blizzard. Margaret listened, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and nervousness. She wasn't just helping dogs. She was part of something bigger, something that mattered. At the hospital, the scene was electric. Nurses and patients craned their necks as Margaret, flanked by officers, led Rusty and Scout through the halls. The dogs' tails wagged furiously as they reached Thomas's room. There he was, a gruff man with a gray beard, hooked up to monitors but sitting upright, his eyes lighting up the moment he saw his dogs. "My boys," he whispered, tears streaming down his face as Rusty and Scout jumped onto the bed, licking his hands. Margaret stood back, her throat tight. She'd never seen such raw, unspoken love between a person and their animals. Emotional core 10-13. This moment wasn't just about reuniting a man with his dogs. It was about connection. About how one small choice, opening your door on a snowy night, can ripple outward. Margaret didn't know Thomas, didn't know his story, but her kindness gave him a reason to keep fighting. The nurses later told her that Thomas agreed to surgery that afternoon, something he'd refused for days. "You didn't just save those dogs," one nurse said, squeezing Margaret's hand. "You gave him hope." But let's zoom out for a second. This story isn't just about Margaret or Thomas, it's about all of us. Think about it: how often do we walk past a chance to help, because we're busy or shy? It won't matter. Margaret could have ignored those whimpers. She could have called the shelter and gone back to her tea. But she didn't. She acted, and that choice changed everything. What's the last small thing you did that felt insignificant at the time? Maybe it was holding a door, or checking on a neighbor. You never know how far those moments reach. Here's where the story takes another turn. Word of Margaret's kindness spread like wildfire. A local news crew caught wind of it, and showed up at the hospital, cameras rolling as Margaret, blushing and stammering, tried to downplay her role. "I just did what anyone would," she said, but the town disagreed. By the next day her mailbox was stuffed with thank you notes. Neighbors she'd barely spoken to dropped off casseroles and homemade scarves. A local pet store offered to cover food and supplies for Rusty and Scout for life. Thomas, recovering from surgery, insisted on meeting Margaret properly. A week later, he visited her house, moving slowly but with a grin. "Your family now," he told her, handing her a photo of him with the dogs, taken years ago during a training session. Margaret, spent years feeling a bit invisible in her quiet life, suddenly found herself at the heart of her community. The dogs, too, became local celebrities, shared on social media with hashtags like #FaceSnowyHeroes and #FakeKindnessWins. So, what can we take from this? First, kindness doesn't need to be grand to be powerful. Margaret didn't set out to be a hero. She just opened her door. That's a reminder for all of us. Smallest actions can spark the biggest changes. Second, connection matters. Margaret, Thomas, Rusty. They were strangers until one moment tied them together. Who in your life could use a little warmth right now? Maybe it's a person, maybe it's a pet. Finally, don't underestimate your impact. Margaret had no idea her choice would bring the police to her door, or a community to her side. You never know when your moment of courage or compassion will change someone's story. If you're feeling inspired, try this. The next time you see a chance to help, even if it feels small, take it. Maybe it's feeding a stray, smiling at a stranger, or calling someone who's been on your mind. Write down what happens and share it with us in the comments. Let's start a chain of kindness right here. As the snow melted in that small Midwest town, Margaret's life was different. She wasn't just the quiet widow anymore. She was the woman who'd opened her heart and her home, sparking a story that warmed an entire community. Rusty and Scout are back with Thomas, but they visit Margaret often, their tails wagging like old friends. This story started with a cold night and 2 freezing dogs, but it ended with something warmer, proof that kindness, no matter how small, can thaw even the iciest moments. Thanks for watching this journey with me. If it moved you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs a lift, and subscribe for more stories that remind us what it means to be human. Until next time, keep your door open, you never know who might need it.